As mentioned, here it is, Brian Howell. To me, like you have many titles, but you're just like the guy, the go-to when it comes to Colorado, anything, specifically Colorado football. And that's where we sit today in week 2, Brian. Welcome to Y Option. You've got a game in Lincoln, Nebraska. Lots to talk to you about today, man. Thanks for the time.
You bet. Thanks for having me. It's always good to talk to you. And I was glad to catch up with you at Big 12 Media Day in Las Vegas this summer. Weird that it was at Big 12 Media Day, but it was still nice to see you.
Yeah, it's always great to see you. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of the conversation, I just want to say, like, my favorite part about you was every year I would see you and your son on, in the media section at a game, whether it was in Seattle, whether it was in Boulder, whether it was in Arizona. And it was really cool. And I think, like, you do this long enough, like, you get to know people beyond their byline or beyond their Twitter handle. And it has been such a joy to get to know you over the years. And you inspired me. This past spring, I took our oldest son with me to the Oregon Spring game. So I was like,
That's
okay,
awesome.
come on, Brian's doing it. I can do this too, man. So I wonder, like, what impact have you felt that has had on yourself or maybe him? And do you continue to do that?
Yeah, he's actually one of 4 kids that we have. He's just the one that's the most into sports. And I've made it a point of all 4 of my kids have been on a work trip with me at some point. And so my oldest son got to go a couple of times, and my daughter went a couple of times. She's now a freshman at Utah State. And last year for the CU Utah game, last game of the year, I brought her with me because she wanted to do a college campus tour. So we spent the weekend when we weren't at the game, visiting some of the campuses around Utah. And so my other son's been with me to a game. And then the youngest who you've seen and know the most is Mason. And he's the sports kid. And he's basically a de facto member of the media up there. I don't know why they don't just give him a permanent press pass because he's at games so often, but he just loves it. He's the one decked in CU gear and will, wearing the CU stuff all the time. But the impact is it's been great. I mean, it's hard sometimes in this business. You feel like you're away from your family a lot of times, and it's nice to bring them along with you and connect with them. My wife has been on trips too. I don't leave her out. So, but it's nice to involve the family in that way and get those weekends with them that you may not get when you're on the road.
I love that. Okay, so Curtis Snyder, I know you're listening. Okay, get him a seat. Come on,
That's
hook
right.
Mason up. Would you, man? I mean, golly. But no, it's my favorite part of running into you is the humanity side of you. So with that, I have covered Colorado going back to Dan Hawkins.
Yeah.
Eric Keesaw is the offensive coordinator, is now at Florida, right? And really all throughout Embry, and then Coach Mack, Coach McIntyre, and here we go, Durrell, and now here with Deion Sanders, of course known as Coach Prime. Big picture, like, what has the experience covering Colorado been like for you over the course of your lifetime? Because I think your entire life, outside of maybe a year and a half, you've spent in this state being connected to this program.
Yeah, in fact, I was in high school when they won a national title back in 1990, and so it's actually been sort of surreal getting to like become friends with Darian Hagan, who was the quarterback of that title team. In fact, they had a really nice game. He's now the running backs coach at San Diego State, and it's very weird seeing him wear red, by the way. Speaking of, and here Nebraska week, but to the point that we're friends to the point that I texted him the other day and just said, hey, nice debut. It was nice to see you in a headset again, and so that's great. And Eric Bieniemy, I got to know when he was the OC here, and so that's just kind of cool, those connections. And really, this is my 15th season covering them. I go back to Dan Hawkins as well, and there's so many people that you get to know. And when Coach Prime was hired, there was a lot of people that say, I'm so excited for guys like you that have been through so much crap and covering bad football, and this must be so much better. And yeah, the football wasn't great, but the people at CU have been phenomenal. And even though the football wasn't always great, there's been a lot of really good people I've covered and gotten to know, and players that were on some of those bad teams that I bet if I ran into today, you'd still dab them up, give them a hug, something like that. And, guys that, would remember me, that I remember them, that it's those connections that make it fun when you've covered a program as long as I have.
That's why you're the perfect guest for Nebraska week. So put into context, through the lens of the West Coast, like, what is this rivalry like? We know it dates back, of course, to the Big 12, and now Nebraska's in the Big Ten,
Yeah.
and Colorado's their first year back in the Big 12.
Yeah, it was my first year was they were both still in the Big 12, and that was my first year covering them. Was Dan Hawkins' last year, and he only lasted 9 games. But so I covered the game, the very last Big 12 game between these teams back in 2010, and Nebraska got them that time. But the rivalry is it's pretty intense, and I think for a long time it was pretty one-sided. Colorado hated Nebraska. Nebraska's kind of like, dude, get off of us. Leave us alone. We got Oklahoma to worry about. We got all these other things to worry about. But over the years, I think Nebraska's developed some hatred of Colorado as well, and you can sense that now. As they've played a few times now since leaving the Big 12 after 2010, that there's some of that as well. And I heard Dylan Raiola, the Nebraska quarterback. He was asked about it. He's never been a part of it, but his dad played there, and his dad. He was, my dad reminded me, hey, I never lost to these guys. And so, there's a little bit of, you can't lose to these guys. So there's a little bit of that intensity on both sides. And I've now covered, was it 4 CU Nebraska games? And they're intense, no matter what, if it's Boulder, Lincoln, the atmosphere is pretty cool.
Ready, set. Use French fries to go. Yeah, oil from French fries. Turn yesterday's leftovers into today's fuel. More power, lower emissions. 76 renewable diesel fuels all the ways you go, go, go.
Yeah, I mean, I could see like Katie Nixon returning a kickoff, right? Like we all remember that moment.
Yeah.
And last year, who could forget what happened throughout all the extracurricular elements within that game? Let's double down on the game here for a minute. What do you think? Like, where do your eyes go of like, this is what matters most in this game, in an environment that if you look at all of Colorado's road games, yes, Autzen was bonkers last year, but this is almost double the amount of people. This is probably the craziest environment they will have ever played in the Dion era.
Yeah.
What do you make of it, and what matters most?
Yeah, honestly, I was telling somebody else today, I haven't been everywhere around the country, but of all the places I've covered college football, Nebraska's got the best environment. And, I went to a game at Notre Dame as a fan. That might top it, but all the places I've covered, and as you know, I've been all around the Pac-12. This is no slight to anybody, but it's more of a compliment to Nebraska. It's an insane environment. I love going to games there because it's really fun. Yeah, they haven't been in anything like this. They played pretty well on the road last year for the most part, even though they weren't a great team. They go down to TCU and win. They go to Arizona State and win. You've been to ASU. It's nothing like Nebraska. No offense to ASU at all, but like this is something different. And I think what I'm looking for this week is how they handle it. I have no doubt that Shedeur will be fine. I have no doubt Travis Hunter will be fine. Shiloh will be fine. It's some of these other guys that have never been anything like this that you're like, how are they going to handle this? And I think that's going to be a big part of this game.
I've always felt that teams, good or bad, reflect their head coach.
Yeah.
How does this team, how can anyone reflect Deion Sanders? I mean, he's an icon. He's such an anomaly. He's so different than any coach that I've ever seen in my lifetime, who was not just a player and an icon, but a cultural icon. And now he's running a program. Like, how have you noticed how players reflect his personality, reflect the ideals and the temperament that he wants his team to play at, and navigate the highs of being one of the most popular people in sport and entertainment?
Well, I don't know about you, but he's the most confident man I've ever been around in my life. And when you have your sons, one on offense, one on defense, that sort of exude that as well, I think that's easier to bleed into the team. I think what I've seen is just the confidence on this team. And we saw it last year too. I think it went away a little bit as the year went along, but what he brings to this team is confidence, and they believe in themselves because Deion Sanders believes in him and he believes in them. And I think that they take that upon themselves. And when you add guys like Warren Sapp, who is a graduate assistant, but when you put him around the program, I mean, holy cow. I mean, those defensive linemen, talk about taking on the identity. When you got Warren Sapp, one of the most fierce defensive linemen of the last, 20, 30 years, they're going to try to take on that identity as well. And so I think confidence more than anything is what they bring to the table that they get from their head coach.
Yeah, because I think when people from the outside look at Colorado, they probably use a different word. They might say cocky
Yeah.
instead of confident.
Mhm.
And that there's a difference as a performer, right? There's that edge, that razor's edge that we talk about here all the time of like, you got to play on that. And there's a difference. And I think sometimes players can think that they are him,
Mhm.
as Dion would say, like they can think they are him versus like, hey, no, you need to make sure that like you align right. You use the proper hand placement. Like you do the things that he did when he played to make him great.
Yeah.
And you cover this team with tremendous detail. And I think that's something really worth noting because I felt like last year they had success early, but there was this bravado that carried with this team.
Yeah.
And I wonder how grounded the confidence is this year. It feels like it's more grounded than it was last year. And I called a couple of their games and got to see it in person. Where do you net out in year two and the growth that they've made on the intangible side?
Yeah, I think it's probably more grounded this year. And Coach Prime mentioned it that like, last year, as they went along, they realized they brought in some guys that weren't ready for the bright lights, and I think a lot of those guys are gone. And I think when you look at what they brought in this year as opposed to last year, last year a lot of the transfers were FCS guys and Power Five backups, guys that didn't have big game experience. Well, what did they bring in this year? I mean, it's Power Five starters, FBS starters they brought in, and guys like I mentioned this guy a lot, but Chidozie Nwankwo, it was a nose guard at Houston, started 32 games, and he's not phased by anything. He goes out there and plays a great game against North Dakota State. They bring in guys, Nakai Hill Green played linebacker at Charlotte, but he was also at Michigan, and he played a lot at Michigan. So he's been in the big house. He's not phased by these things. And so they bring in guys now that have got that big time experience that I think can back up some of that confidence, and they're not phased by it as much.
Yeah, that's good to hear. What has it like been for you covering this team? Like, take us inside the day to day of trying to track Shedeur, Travis, Dion. I mean, those are easily the three top storylines around this program, and I don't know how many people know a lot more storylines outside of those that cover the team or are calling the games.
It's certainly interesting covering the Coach Prime era as opposed to all those other coaches you mentioned before. Access is not what it used to be. They limit us pretty much. I was watching today. I was looking on YouTube today, and I'm watching all the interviews that Nebraska's posted from their guys this week, and it's like there's like the head coach, the coordinators. There's like 7 or 8 players they've already posted up there. It's like, well, we've had the head coach and an offensive lineman. That's it. That's all we've had this week. And we're supposed to have a couple more tomorrow, but a total of probably 4 or 5 guys we're going to get all week. And, so it's limited as opposed to what we've had in the past. It's a lot of YouTube watching because, Well Off Media, the pregame show, guys like that are around this program all the time. They like to control the narrative. And so you have to watch that and pay attention to that. If you don't, you're kind of behind and you're kind of with the fans along with it. But I think that it makes it for an interesting way to cover a team, that's for sure. And so you try to soak up as much as you can when you're there. It's like when I'm at the facility the other day, we all get a couple of guys, but you end up riding in the elevator with a tight end that you didn't get to talk to, but you ask him a couple of questions. How's things going? Kind of get a sense just in the casual conversation. And so it's more the casual conversations from people you run into that you try to glean as much as you can.
Yeah, what's that like for you? Because there are different ways to do it, right? Some coaches are wide open. You referenced Nebraska. I got SC this weekend. I feel like they've got 10 players available every week.
Yeah.
Where do you net out on what's best for the team? Where do you net out on controlling an environment or a narrative, as you referenced? And then you doing your job. Like, what is that like in that experience?
Well, I think that what's best for the team is what works for that team, honestly. And I think if that's the way Coach Prime wants to run his program, that works for them. I think I didn't cover Clay Helton and USC, but it seemed like they were pretty wide open when he was there. Other programs I see, they're pretty wide open. If that works for them, that's great. From a journalist perspective, I wish they were more wide open because, you like the stories. And like I mentioned, all the guys in the past that I've talked to that I have relationships with, it's great because you talk to him so many times. Like Steven Montez, I probably interviewed 100 times during his time at Colorado. And if I saw him today in a grocery store, I'd probably, give each other, handshakes, maybe a bro hug. I don't know. I don't know how much he likes me, but you develop relationships, and I don't know if I've really got that with guys here, just because we don't get that access as much, and I do miss that part of it. But that's selfishly for me doing my job. I miss that part of it that we don't always get with Coach Prime. But I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way to do it from a program standpoint.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, you always want access.
Yeah.
Who doesn't?
Mm-hmm.
Because you want to tell the stories with some sort of credibility or some insight that is different than what other people may have. And in the same vein, like Coach Prime is so different.
Yeah.
It's just such a unique one where I always try to defend that a little bit of when, it's easy to come down in that program. It feels like they are one of the either most beloved or most hated programs in the country.
Right.
Just based on people's perception. And I just try to remind people, like, this is one of one. Like, we're not going to see this again. Like, Bo Jackson's not going to be the head coach at Auburn. Like,
right.
it's just not going to happen. At least I wouldn't project it to. But you referenced the word relationships. We see Shedeur and Travis everywhere, seemingly together. How do you define the relationship between those two?
It's almost brotherly, it seems like. And before I answer that, I will say one thing, Yogi, is that I want to go back to your previous question real quick and just say this program is much less of a circus than it's made out to be nationally. People think that it's a circus around here. It's really not. It's very, I think people, if they were around it, would be surprised how normal it feels and how football it feels. So from that point of view, it works well for them. But as far as Shedeur and Travis, I do think it's sort of brotherly, and they've got this bond. And Shedeur talked about it after the game the other day. He's like, look, it goes back to when Travis took a chance on Jackson State. He didn't have to do that. And he goes, I look back on it, he goes, I have so much respect for him. This was a 5-star kid, the number one recruit in the country, that says, you know what, I'm going to do something different, and I'm going to go play for Jackson State because I want to learn from Deion Sanders. And Shedeur's like, I have so much respect for that. And Shedeur, in a way, did the same thing. It made more sense because it's his dad, but they both did that same thing. And I think I would guess they're bonded in that, and that they're both legit Power 5 guys coming out of high school that chose a different path and have really had to sort of prove themselves in a different way. And just when you watch them play, there is some connection that they have. You're like, I don't know how they figured that play out, but they just did, Yeah. And it's like they knew something there that nobody else saw.
Yeah, they're really gifted. I mean, we've all covered the same quarterbacks at Colorado, and it's easy to say Shedeur is the most talented one to grace those practice fields. Mm-hmm. But when I think of all the quarterbacks that we've been able to cover, his anticipation, his accuracy, I think he's got a toughness to him clearly that we saw on display in the first game. We saw all last season. I'd imagine he's had that his whole life, and it's just unique. And I think to your point at Travis, not only the Jackson State thing, but to me coming to Colorado, like that showcased the trust that he had in Deion. So to your point of it not being a circus, like, when players of that caliber are making decisions, you've been around a few of them, I've been around a few of them, it's business. Yeah. And it's also like where they can grow and evolve. And I don't mean business like NIL, pay me. I mean, like, how is my craft going to evolve? So to that point on Travis Hunter and his craft, like, how long can he go playing 120 plus snaps? Like, you look at their schedule and I don't see a game that's like, they'll be up by 30 at halftime. Like, they don't have that. That was kind of the opener per se, and that wasn't the case against North Dakota State.
Yeah, it's interesting, and you're right about the business decisions because, I know you're asking about Travis, but Shedeur made a really good point at Big 12 Media Day. He's like, look, NIL is great and everything, but I'm trying to set myself up for making the real money when you get to the NFL. That's what Travis is doing. That's what Shedeur is doing, and Shedeur or Travis, I think he can do it as long as he wants to do it. I don't know if the NFL is going to allow him to do it, but Deion Sanders will, and he'll do it all season for 120 snaps. And I did think, all right, they're deeper at corner, they're deeper at receiver than last year. There's now opportunities for Travis to take a breather. He missed 2 snaps the other day, and one of them, one of them was because he caught a pass. And as he went down, his helmet came off, and the rule, you have to come off for a play. That was one of the snaps he missed. It's because he had to by rule. So he missed one other snap the entire night, offensive defense. And so, I thought that was a night to get a breather. I thought they would start giving more breathers to him, but no, he played every defensive snap, all but 2 offensive snaps, and yeah, I think he can do it as long as he wants. One of my colleagues remarked, post game press conference, he comes up there. It's the first time we've talked to him since the post game at TCU last year. He doesn't do media, and so he gets up there, and it's shortly after the game. They've showered and everything, but usually guys, they still got the sweat going because it takes a while to get that done. There was not a bead of sweat on Travis. It's like he just came from a math class or something like that and was heading home. So he's a pretty impressive.
Oh God, I wish it was. I think it's October 19th. They go to Arizona. Him and Tetero McMillan, I will be glued, as you will be, to every single snap. They got a long ways until then. This game against Nebraska, last year, it felt kind of personal, right? I think that it felt Colorado was kind of personal early on in the season. It was such a big statement in that win against a team that had just played in the national championship.
Right.
It feels like, to your point, like it's toned down, compared to where it was the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks of the season last year. It was all Colorado, and it didn't feel like a circus per se, but it was a show.
Yeah.
Right. Now, it's a show every time they go anywhere. People want to see them. They want to reach out and touch them. It's going to be that this weekend. How do you feel around, you referenced the arena that they're going to walk into, in that stadium, which is just packed and all of the rivalry elements to it? How do you think they're going to navigate like the emotions of that? And who is the one that can keep that ship steady? Because I also think like the Stars are also somewhat emotional, right?
Yeah.
And they are catalysts to that type of play.
Well, I on the field, I think Shedeur and Travis are the two that'll keep it that way. I think that, like I said earlier, they're not going to be fazed by any of that stuff. And I almost think that it helps Colorado that very few of them really understand this rivalry. They didn't grow up in it. There's hardly any Colorado-born guys on this team. And so, they didn't really grow up in this rivalry. So it's not like there's no inherent hatred for Nebraska because they didn't grow up around it. And so I think that almost helps them. But on the field, I do think Shedeur is super cool. I think he keeps his calm. I think Travis is not fazed by a whole lot. You got guys there that are, Coach Prime likes to use this term, they're pros. I think there's a lot of guys with that sort of that pro mindset, like, hey, we just got to play football. I mean, this is what you do, and this is why we're here for college football. Is 90,000 is what we want, And so, Justin Mayers, one of their guards, played at UTEP last year, who Nebraska just beat. But he said, look, this is what we came here for, and the best way to quiet them is to run it down their throat and have a nice drive. So that's what we want to do. And so you love that mentality, and that's certainly what they're going to try to do.
Yeah, I think sometimes the bigger the environment, the calmer you get when you are one of those veteran savvy players that they have at the quarterback position. I know everybody who's 1-0 this week thinks they're going to go to the CFP, but everybody has holes and deficiencies and games, and the ball bounced so many different ways. Where do you see this team in this new look Big 12?
It's really hard to project. I think it's a wide open Big 12, and I think Colorado could be anywhere. I think that, to me, a bowl game is their floor, and I think that their ceiling is, if things go really well, they can compete for the title in the Big 12. I really think they can, but it's going to be tough. I almost look at the Big 12 as kind of different tiers, and I think Utah, Oklahoma State, Kansas, Arizona, to me are like kind of those five that are like, okay, those are the front runners. Those are the five, and pick a name out of a hat. Any one of them could win it. But then I think there's this other group of five: UCF, Iowa State, Colorado's in there, Texas Tech. There's different teams I'm probably leaving out, but they can jump in there too. I think that with if the ball bounces the right way, they can be in there too. I think there's only a handful of teams in this conference that can't win it because I don't think they're good enough. But I think there's probably 10 teams that could win it.
Yeah. Before we get you out of here, a couple more, and really appreciate the time, Brian. I look at the Big 12 now, and it reminds me of the Pac-12 in years past, with just a bunch of really good teams.
Yeah.
And then the country doesn't really respect the concept of a bunch of really good teams. Right. They want a premier team or two at the top, a la Georgia, Bama, a la Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon now, et cetera, et cetera. Do you co-sign on that theory? And if so, How has the Big 12, or will the Big 12 in your eyes, like, market? I know they've tried to say it off the bat at media days of like, it's the deepest league in the country. And it might be.
Yeah.
You know, I'm curious how you think this thing will shake out, because I got asked surprisingly earlier today in an interview. They said, all right, how many teams from the Big 10 to the CFP? I was like, wow, we're already on that, and it's only week 1.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point you make, because for a number of years, the Pac-12 did not make it to the playoffs, right? When it was a 4-team playoff, and they were kind of out of it by November because they had their best teams had 2 losses. And I think if there was a 4-team playoff, nobody would project anyone from the Big 12 going to the playoff, right? I look at the best teams in Utah, Oklahoma State, in my opinion. I don't see them as top 4 teams, but somebody's going to be in there because it's a 12-team playoff. But I think that the parity is similar to what the Pac-12 was in years past. And I think the way you market it is just the great football every Saturday. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of really good games every Saturday in the Big 12, and games that matter, because I think there's 10 teams that could win this conference. And this race could shift every single Saturday, where all of a sudden you're like, oh, UCF? Okay. I didn't think about them, but week 6, you're like, they might win this thing. And then a couple weeks later, they're not in it, but Kansas State, wow. Okay. They're really good. You know, so I think there's a lot of really good teams to watch out for. And I think they'll be dangerous when you get to the playoff.
Yeah, when I look at this game this weekend, Colorado and Nebraska to me are very similar. They're kind of in that next group of teams within their respective league. Ton of excitement, anticipation. We referenced Colorado. You referenced Dylan Raiola, excuse me. He's an absolute prodigy, you could argue, in terms of his capability. But you got to go do it. How do you think this game nets out? What do you think is the deciding factor among the Buffs and Nebraska?
I think the deciding factor is going to be Shedeur Sanders. And I think that when you have the best quarterback on the field, you've got a shot to win every week. I think he's going to be the difference this week. I certainly think Nebraska can win this game. Them being at home, you almost have to give them an edge in a lot of ways. But when I look at quarterback, Dylan Raiola is really good, but he's a 5-star freshman making his second start. Shedeur Sanders is making like his 4 millionth start or whatever it is. You know, he started almost every game since he was like 12 years old. And so I give the edge to them. I think it's going to be a really good football game, but I'm going 30-27 Buffs in this one. And it's going to be a fun game.
30-27. Is Mason coming with you?
He's not.
Oh, damn.
No.
All right.
He might. That might be the deciding factor if he was. But, yeah, he won't be there with me.
Okay, cool, man. Well, I can't wait. Love watching your content. Love watching this team progress. Selfishly, it would be a really fun if it was a tight game. Nebraska wins, because we're calling them the following week. So keep that momentum going. But either way, I know you're going to be covering it at elite level, which is what you always do. Brian Howell, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate you coming on Y Option, man.
Thanks. Anytime, Yogi.